My name is Annelise Barberon. I'm the General Delegate of the SST International Forum. We are very pleased to welcome you for the third session today, which will tackle the subject of new forms of work, the impact of digitalization. You can follow the conference in various languages if you click on the floor button on the top of your screen and you select the language that you want to hear the conference in. Have a good debate today, and we'll be happy to follow any questions that you have after the speakers have taken the floor. Alain, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annelise, for this introduction and presentation. We are glad to have you all here today, and it is a pleasure for us actually to have this conference, this virtual conference on the 3 continents, so that we can go on with our online virtual meeting. I think that right now you are more familiar with our organization. Our organization is called Organisation Rencontre du Mont Blanc, and we are here in order to talk and work for the from the economic point of view, environmental point of view, social point of view. We have been working in those fields for 15 years, and we have 3 main action directions. That is to say, to influence the policy programs, but also to put in place some sustainable projects and to keep on working for some new ideas from the social and economical point of view. And today we're here for our 3rd virtual session that is very actual, because we're going to talk about new forms of work and digitalization. Next week we will have our last section that is dedicated to sustainable development, but also the integration of the new forms of economy. And now I'm going to talk about all the other sessions that we had for the moment. They were dedicated to some economical topics. And actually, if you didn't have the possibility to follow us, you still have the possibility to see once again our conferences online. Today, this session is very important because we are now at the center of a new dynamic in order to go towards a new digitalization of work. We have already seen new changes that right now, actually, in only recent months, in few months, changed in a total way, in a complete way, the economic systems, the working systems, and in general, our society. So we experienced the birth of new relationships in terms of work and also new forms of work in general. So right now, everything is based on online virtual platforms that are growing in a very fast way. So new forms of job and new forms of work need also some mutual forms of establishment, but also to respect the rights of workers. And I'm now going to give the floor to our moderator, Jacques, so that he will be able to moderate our session, our conference. And the main question of this conference is, how can we keep on working in this new environment based on new technologies and digitalization, keeping an eye on the rights and the needs of workers in order to reduce disequalities in the labor and social fields. I also would like to share with you this important message, and I hope that during the next 2 hours you will enjoy the conference. So Jacques, you can go on. Can you hear me?
Merci.
Yes.
Merci beaucoup pour cette
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation and introduction. It is a pleasure for me actually to be the moderator of this conference that will last till 5 p.m. So we will have a plenty of time. My name is Jacques Destin and I work and my main field of work is the development of new forms of job and work in general here in France. Actually, we have always invested in new kind of technological companies and campaigns initiatives in order to give the possibility to startups and young people to be active and to keep on growing in those new fields of the economy. And we always present new initiatives in order to support people in Europe and in France, of course, in order to go towards the ecological transition, but also to adapt to new forms of works in line, of course, with the topic of sustainability. And it is a real pleasure, actually, for me to be here for this roundtable. And as our president said at the beginning, the idea today is to talk and discuss about those new models, those new examples actually of jobs and works, and especially about the new platforms that are right now especially important, but also new forms of companies such as Amazon, for example, giving us the possibility today to deliver everything we want, everywhere we want in the world in a very limited period of time. So, of course, we're talking about new forms of job, new forms of work that are actual, especially in this historical moment, and that were developed in recent years. But we also have to focus on the idea of social protection, of course, and on the protection of the rights of workers. So we need to focus today on the usage of new technologies by new companies in order to keep on working from the social point of view, but also from the environmental protection point of view. And we will also talk about the solidarity and social economy in order to put in place new efficient models that always have an eye on the rights of workers and the rights of employees and employers, of course. And this is really the main focus of our discussion, of our debate and conference. Before giving the word to our speakers, I really would like to focus a little bit on the actual situation, because in recent months, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic completely changed the way we work, the way we live our normal daily life, and of course stressed the importance and the growth of digitalization. And right now, the big platforms I was talking before are at the core, actually, of our daily life. During the COVID-19 pandemic, actually, here in France, several million of people started working from their houses, from their homes. And actually, nowadays in France, 1/4 of the workers work from home, actually, do some teleworking activities. So we definitely discovered a new way of working. And nowadays, we are obliged to use new devices and platforms such as Zoom, or the platform we're using at the moment to communicate with other people, to keep on working and to keep up with our daily activities, normal daily activities. And in some countries, especially in the US, there are some big companies that we sometimes call big tech that have always been working in order to speed up the development of teleworking and remote communication, and right now they are investing even more actually on this field of economy, and they are proving actually the efficiency of those new forms of work. I just would like to invite now our speakers to take the floor in order to talk about the actual crisis, but also the speed of work, teleworking, and the new forms of works. I just would like to get their point of view, actually, and their opinions about those new forms of work, about what we're doing at the moment, even because we need to think about the work organization, but also the relationships with workers, and also the collective relationships, but also the personal organization and the balance between the private and personal life, because all those elements, all those issues represent some really big problems actually in our actual situation. Sometimes there is the risk of isolation for people practicing teleworking, and we always struggle with the connection problems. We all know that. And there are some other jobs actually and some other workers that cannot use those new forms of work, that cannot use teleworking. And I'm thinking about several roles actually. And my final question actually to our speakers is to understand what we can do in order to improve the actual situation, but also I would like to ask them something more about their opinion about those new forms of job. And I would like to give you 5 minutes each. You can also introduce yourself before starting explaining us your point of view and your opinion, and after that we will go on with the follow-up questions. So first of all, I'm going to give the floor to Sandrino Graceffa so that maybe he will introduce himself. Thank you very much, Jacques. I don't actually know if you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. So my first reaction about the impact of the actual health crisis, but also economic crisis. But actually before that, I have almost forgot I needed to introduce myself. I'm Sandrino Graceffa. I am a researcher and consultant at the Ocleam laboratory in Paris. And I also work for a research institute and agency here in Paris. And actually, we have been focusing with some research works on the transformations within the labor sphere. And we have also analyzed some new experiences carried out by several workers. During my career, I have also directed for more than 10 years a cooperative for freelancers with a great number of European and also French, of course, freelancers. So going back to your question and going back to your presentation, actually, I think that you have already mentioned several important elements and points. So I think that this crisis had and still has a great impact from the general point of view. And I think that it has also increased the inequalities that were present in our world before the COVID-19 period. I think that some of those inequalities are even stronger right now, more visible. So I think that there is a like a cycle that was started by this crisis. And as we have already said, the main winner when it comes to the labor market are the online platforms, or the big tech, as we have already called them. And I'm sorry, but there is a technical problem, and we have no sound at the moment. So we need to adopt also new forms of distribution. I don't know if we have some technical problems. I don't know if I can still go on. Yes, now we can hear you and you can go on. So I was talking about the big tech that are present, of course, within the sales market, but also the delivery market, and they are even more important nowadays, especially for those new forms of work and job that maybe in the past were struggling a little bit in order to appear on the market, on the main market, because they were more unstable. As I was saying before, the big winners actually of this moment are the big tech, but also people that are able to imagine new forms of job, but unfortunately, on the other side, jobs that do not have any kind of social protection, for example, that do not protect the rights of workers, employers, and employees. So it is a real trend at the moment. It is a dramatic trend. And on the other side, I think that another dramatic but interesting aspect at the same time is that nowadays we're experiencing the fragility of our system, especially when it comes to the importance of informal work. So I think that informal work and informal workers in general are not in the winning side. So they unfortunately are not part of any type of social assistance forms, any type of support given by the government, the different governments. And so it was, and it is still very difficult actually to support a huge number of workers that nowadays are really struggling in order to keep on working. So even before the crisis, they had very limited forms of social protection, and right now they are facing an extremely difficult situation. So they cannot, for example, use and benefit from the bonuses, for example, of given by the government, the different governments during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that this is another interesting aspect to take into account in order to better understand the importance of a widening society of workers, to include every type of worker, but also to support unstable forms of job and to create, of course, new forms of job and new jobs in general. Thank you very much, Sandrino. And actually, the topic of inequalities is very important, is crucial, especially nowadays. So we were talking about the winners, actually, and the losers of this period. And among the losers, unfortunately, we have those people who are not covered by any type of assistance and protection given by the government. Right now, I would like to give the floor to Sandra, so that you can add your point of view about the acceleration of teleworking. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the possibility to take part into this discussion, this debate that is essential, is crucial for us all, according to all the changes that our society is now experiencing. And I am part of the French trade union, the most important French trade union. And I'm also part of the European trade union with Alain, my colleague that talked before. And I also represent the civil society and the different committees of the civil society at a European scale. And I have to say that the role of platforms that teleworking represent nowadays a very important topic that we have recently discussed within the trade unions, even at a European level. And there is a concept that actually appears to me as something essential, that is to say, to understand what is going on right now in our society, in our labor sphere, both on the French European level, but also from the international level, because these Rencontres du Mont Blanc, they have some people and they have public participating from everywhere in the world, actually. So right now, the International Labour Organization stated that 62% of workers throughout the world are now part of the informal economy. And of course, this figure, this data depends according to the region, according to the country, to the economy. And we can reach levels of and percentages of 70%, for example, in some countries. And what does it mean? Well, an informal economy means that those workers are totally out of any type of social protection forms, but also in some special specific periods, such as the COVID-19 period, are not able to be protected actually by the government, and so they are struggling even more, they are suffering even more from the labor inequalities. So this situation means that those workers, once again, are not protected and they cannot work. And this is a great problem because sometimes, and especially for them, if they do not work, it means that they do not have anything to eat, for example, they cannot provide for their families. And so this is a very important international challenge, at least European challenge too. And trade unions from Europe, from all over the world, are responsible, are the main actors in order to try to regulate and to find proper solutions to solve this problem. One of the main problems actually of our century. So we are now using a lot of new technologies, but we also need to focus on the protection of workers in order to fully use the benefits, the advantages provided by those new platforms and new technologies. So, of course, the innovations and new technologies must be used, especially in this peculiar period that we are living, but we also need to take into consideration other aspects. So when it comes to people working for platforms, actually, even for them, because of the COVID-19 period and epidemic, there is the risk of having some negative consequences and repercussions. And as Jacques said before, I think that the entire work organization and also the forms of work are now totally different. And sometimes there is the risk of not being prepared in order to face those new forms of job. So for people working for platforms, actually, they had a huge impact because of COVID-19, because of the lockdown, because of isolation, of course. And right now, platforms are more and more demanded. There are a lot of challenges linked to this thing because those workers, unfortunately, have very poor salaries, limited salaries, and we, of course, know that as those workers cannot stay at home, there is also the risk for them to keep on working even if they are ill, even if there is the risk of COVID-19 virus. There are also some other problems concerning, for example, the delivery of primary goods, of drugs, of fresh food, especially for those people who purchase those items on Amazon. And connected to this issue, actually, we need to deal with the rights of people who are in charge of those deliveries, actually, and we need to protect their rights. And unfortunately, I have to say that those aspects are not equally represented at the moment. So I just would like to say that COVID-19 represents a big change, of course, of our society, but also some risks and negative consequences for us all, because there is the risk of isolation, but there is especially a big risk of increasing the social and working and professional inequalities. There are also some positive elements, because we all know that people employed in those platforms, but not only, also nurses and doctors, had the possibility to keep on working during the lockdown phase. Most of the times, we all know, not in good and proper conditions for their health, but they were able to keep on working anyway. The majority of people decided to work with the teleworking method, and so companies were faced to those new forms of job, to those big changes. They had to face a lot of difficulties because they were really struggling in order to find out how to deal with those new technology and with this change. We know then that another struggle was the one faced by family, because children were at home, there was no school, of course, and parents at the same time had to keep on working, for example, from home. And there is also another part of workers, especially the ones working in the transport area, in the transport field, that had some problems too, because we didn't know, we didn't have some precise pieces of information concerning the situation of transport, and that had also some consequences and negative repercussions on us all, especially on people who had to go to their workplace anyway, because transportations was not assured, at least here in Paris. So again, we can understand that COVID-19 had a lot of negative consequences and repercussions on us all, from the economic point of view, from, of course, the health point of view, but also from the social point of view, and from the personal point of view, because a lot of people are now experiencing some cases of isolation, depression, and so on and so forth. So this is just a little summary, let's say. So the situation is not black or white. There are also some shades in the middle, some positive situations, of course, but also a lot of negative situations. And we all need to work at our best, at the best of our possibilities, in order to try to understand what to do in the future.
Thank you, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Sorry, I tried to take the floor and I was muted and I had to refresh my page. Sorry, I'm really, really sorry and I apologize for that. Thank you very much, Franca, for this contribution. I would like to address Pauline now. Well, I would like to have had Pauline as one of the previous speakers in one of the previous sessions, because we are talking about a crisis and we are all going through this crisis. Well, the work and the working habits were speeding up. And so thank you very much for your, sorry, your contribution. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you. I hope you are hearing me, because I have some connection problems and issues. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Well, yes, concerning the period, the peak of the COVID pandemic, I would like to say that working habits have changed a lot over time, but not at the same speed everywhere. Can you hear me? Or maybe do I have to refresh my page because I cannot hear anyone? Well, they are telling me it's good enough. Well, the working habits have changed a lot, and the habits, the working habits, as I told you before, have completely changed when the pandemic has come. So teleworking was not an issue before. In Europe, the situation was quite different, but here the situation was completely different. Also, the way in which people work. So it was completely disrupted, and sometimes companies work in a way that was not suitable for the expectations when it comes to facing the crisis. So cooperatives and companies had some difficulties going through the crisis. Teleworking is not exactly the same. Telework or home office is not a standard habit. We are not used to it, but I have to say that at the social level, cooperatives and companies, collective companies, have understood that they had to change their habits. And big companies and corporations, they also had to change. I hope I will have the opportunity to give you some examples in a few minutes. So I think the situation will last a long time, also after COVID, because we realized that the companies that are the closest companies to the local context are the ones that were the fastest ones to face the crisis. I mean, they were very, very fast, and this kind of upheaval is going on, and it's something ongoing. So it's important now to see how they how they are doing, how they work, and to check their way of doing things, because we will have to rethink our daily life and routine and habits also in the working environment. Thank you very much, Pauline. Last contribution, last speech on the development of work under the pressure of pandemic is the one by Esteban. Well, how do you see things and in the US above all?
Good morning. Well, it's morning here. Wherever you are, my name's Esteban. Yeah, I am based in Philadelphia. I'm actually from New York originally, and part of my role is being in touch with what's happening all around the country, and with our partners around the world in the worker co-op movement. I run the worker co-op movement here in the US as the executive director for the US Federation of Worker Co-ops. But I'm also connected to a lot of other allied movements that we're in coalition with. I am a board member with the Cooperative Innovation Lab here, which is exploring some of these issues around the innovations in the future of work using cooperative models. I'm also an advisor for the Institute for the Cooperative Digital Economy. And maybe more relevant for some of the social movements, I've been for the last couple of years an advisor to the Movement for Black Lives policy table. This is the advocacy aspect of Black Lives Matter here in the U.S. So some of that kind of colors my perspective, and we'll get into that in a little bit. In terms of the immediate impact of the pandemic and the economic impact, I want to echo what a lot of my colleagues have already said, especially some of the commentary from Sandrino, which really echoes what's happening in the U.S. Around the transfer of wealth, around the impact on workers in particular. For us, a lot of our member workplaces inside of the Worker Co-op Federation are in essential industries. They're doing food processing, delivery, logistics. People in our membership work in grocery stores, operate farms in some cases, and a lot of them are actually doing nursing, healthcare, transportation. So even when things were really, really shut down, many of our workers were still having to be on the front lines of work as essential workers, and doing so in a context where it was really unclear what the risks were. I mean, it was so early in the pandemic that we weren't even sure how to mitigate some of those risks around health, and some of our members just had to take that risk or to cover for one another for people who weren't able to show up at the workplace due to being either immunocompromised or some of our elderly colleagues. But I think we were really heartened by a few things. One, for us in the U.S., the worker co-op, specifically the worker co-op side, I also am involved in a lot of the other cooperative sectors. But on the worker co-op side, we're really blended with social movements, grassroots movements, and community-based organizations in a way that's it's hard to parse. It's almost indistinguishable. And I think that one of the reasons why that mattered so much in the very first weeks of the pandemic is that our members not only had the skills, the capital resources, the businesses to be able to pivot and become a resource for their communities, but they also had the political framework, the social relationships to pause operating as a regular business and to become a mutual aid or to leverage their resources to be a mutual aid infrastructure for their communities. That happened without prompting from us. A lot of it was amplified through our network and communication. And so they used our membership platforms to share some of the practices, some of the, for example, there were cafes and restaurants who were not able to do their regular business and serve their communities, but they already had a list of vendors who were supplying them with food. And they often had retail space. And so they were able to put up new signs on their windows and say, listen, we're not doing our regular cafe or restaurant, but we are going to be a place where you can come walking distance from where you live and get your essential groceries. And we will order different things than we would if we were just catering our regular menu. So they became food hubs. That's one example. Another one of our workplaces that does light manufacturing, mostly around textiles, because they knew we were connected to this network and we knew that there was a shortage of personal protective equipment, they pivoted their operations. They said, we're no longer going to make t-shirts for right now. We're going to instead make some of this PPE for frontline workers in hospitals. They made gowns, they made masks, they made additional sort of plastic, vinyl barriers and shields for people. And so those were the kinds of things they were able to do because of their embeddedness in our social network and our membership network. Part of that, I think, was also being able to do crowdfunding from people who understood the importance of their business model, and for a lot of our members who were stuck at home, who had shut down business and were furloughed, they were able to contribute and donate, and they had that personal relationship to trust that they knew exactly where this money was going, and they were able to follow up and see the story and the impact of where small donations made a difference. And I think because of the relationships that we hold, the business that was making that equipment was able to reach out directly to actually the largest worker co-op in our country, which does home healthcare. They were also lacking PPE. So they reached out directly and said, we're going to shift our operations. What do you need? What is in shortest supply? And let's be in touch about filling those orders and subsidizing that and supplying that at cost. So those are the kinds of things that our members were able to do right away. And I think for our federation, we were able to snap into our advocacy mode and make sure that we were at the table to lobby for some of the funds, the relief funds that were going to businesses, a lot of large corporations, but also small businesses. We originally were not going to be included as eligible recipients for that money, meaning our members, the cooperative businesses, any cooperative businesses that were that had multiple owners. And so we were able to advocate and help make sure that there was an exception. They didn't include us entirely, but they did say as long as we were borrowing less than $200,000, I think was the threshold, US dollars, that we were able to tap into some of those funds. And that made all the difference. It literally saved hundreds of worker co-ops, thousands of cooperative businesses, tens of thousands of jobs through some of the payroll protection program legislation that came from Congress that we were able to do. And I think, being organized and in formation meant that we were able to capture millions of dollars billions were going into the American economy, and millions of it were able to come to our businesses to make sure that we were not only preserving the infrastructure of the social solidarity economy and some of these businesses that we already have, but that we were able to be a resource for our communities in their time of need. The last thing I want to say, because it followed up on that immediately, was to just note this extraordinary transfer of wealth that is still occurring, that started occurring in the early days of the pandemic. Obviously, many of you have commented on this already, that the stock value has skyrocketed for a lot of the big tech firms that are based in the US. But there's also a transfer of wealth generally to large corporations, to the wealthiest Americans, and away from working people in this country. Even middle-class people, even upper middle-class people are losing out. And I think that where that sort of comes into direct contact with some of the social movements is that there's always been a stark racialized wealth gap in the United States, especially for Black and Indigenous Americans, and even Black and brown immigrants in the United States is where that wealth gap is most pronounced and extreme. And so I think for us, it recasts what our role is in doing this organizing to build the social solidarity economy and expand it, not just about proving or experimenting with a certain model, but actually understanding that the demand is much bigger, because this is one of the only ways we're going to be able to close that gap. And right at the moment where things are moving in the opposite direction because of this crisis, we're really doubling down. And so our people were absolutely on the streets many of them were organizers, like myself at some level, or my cooperative, my worker cooperative that does consulting and facilitation and strategic planning for social justice and racial justice and economic justice movements who are fighting for a solidarity economy. That we were part and parcel of the leadership and the vision during a lot of the uprisings against anti-Black racism. So making those connections and making sure that our movements, our allies, our funders, our grassroots members, our communities that we're embedded in are starting to make those connections more, that these are not separate issues of public health, of frontline workers and labor organizing, of mutual aid networks and community needs, and all of the economic and racial justice work that we're doing.
Thank you very much, Esteban. Merci beaucoup pour ces 4 interventions.
Thank you very much for these 4 speeches that were delivered after a long introduction. Well, what I would like to highlight is that this COVID crisis and the speeding up of teleworking went hand in hand with the increase in terms of inequalities. We have poor workers and the rich workers, so we have a gap that is getting bigger and bigger. Some of them were weakened and got weaker during the crisis. In terms of transfer of wealth, we think that this transfer always benefited to the same people. So this idea of teleworking has changed and what was disseminated a lot, has spread a lot, and in a parallel there's something that is going on. So there are new platforms, and this crisis will have to be a kind of victory, a winning match, because this idea of platforms, virtual platforms, have made these platforms even more important, and the success of this platform plays a key role. Esteban has also said that during the crisis we have new forms of solidarity, new forms of organizations, forms of solidarity, working methods and jobs for the solidarity and social economy, SSE. So people want to be understood and heard by other people, and they want to raise their voice. They want to organize their work, and they also want to get all their rights. They want to make them be taken into account. And now I would like to leave the floor to Franca on this topic. So over to you. How is SSE changing nowadays, and how can we insist on this model? How can we make sure that this model is more and more relevant? Yes, thank you, Jacques. Well, this matter is very interesting matter. Well, I speak as a trade unionist. There are some aspects that are cross-cutting, and they are not just linked to COVID. There was a crisis in 2008. It was a financial crisis, and in the light of this crisis, companies and cooperatives and alternative forms of organization were very resilient, and they did not got broken by the crisis, let's say, because they did not get broken by the crisis because there were a lot of risks at that time as well. So citizens all over the world were suffering a lot. Well, nowadays, this crisis can also be a kind of opportunity in order to make up new protection models, but also services, but also collective organizations and workers that will have to address our creativity. I can get the example of Celle because we created a trade union whose name is a union, and it is something for new people, for freelancer, and this is something that is very important from this point of view, because not all the workers need a protection system. There are also for example, well, someone who was looking for a work on Airbnb, and this worker was not interested in trade unions, cooperatives, or social protection forms, because they already have a form like that. So it's something completely different. So sometimes you don't know that, but when you are an employee, for example, and you are part of a minority, you are a migrant, or you are not, you are a job seeker, you are not finding a job in the formal economy because you are excluded from this economy because you are not, you didn't study at university, or and then you can decide to work as a full-time worker, or you are a student and you work as a part-time worker, and then a part of this work is a problem because you can't cover your expenses, your costs. So for workers being there, it's not easy to work as workers in standard sectors. So it's important to make a difference when it comes to speaking about freelancers, because we already have, we really have freelancers. They have their own insurance, etc. And then we also have other workers depending on platforms, and they cannot work without them, and they can be fired because the algorithm decided to exclude them, or there are other criteria, and well, for the workers, and you don't have the right to be represented, and the platform says that you are a freelancer. So when you have all these new forms of work, that can be opportunities for some of them. For other people, if they're not regulated, they are very, very big problems. And if we wanted to take like examples in Europe, so we have 24% of workers whose revenue depends on platforms, and you see that it's not a big share in general, but this is a form of work that is growing more and more, and very, very fast. Sometimes you have you have less employees or fewer employees in other countries, and all these forms of work are much more disseminated and widespread. So there are some differences if you think about Italy, where there are some very strict regulations concerning the job market, etc. And sometimes you also have like part-time jobs or other form of occasional job. And another aspect I would like to mention, and I also have a slide on that about casual labor and work and employment. I can say that there are three different parties. You have the platforms, you have the workers, and the user as well. And here we have a specific characteristic or a feature. So tasks are divided into different micro tasks, so micro activities. The work is not really creative. We also talk about like workshop workers, and they just do like or carry out micro tasks. And this platform work is also characterized by online demand. And we also I also have another slide on that. There are other opportunities, as they told us, because there are some workers that cannot find other ways. Sometimes it can be very practical because the working time is decided by the workers themselves, and it can also be a very insightful, interesting form of working, but of entrepreneurship. But there are also some risks. For example, the status of the worker that is really uncertain, and there is a loss of skills, and also social protection matters and issues that come up. When we take a look at the Eurofund study and research that was carried out, we can see the column of risks that is much longer, is a little bit longer than the opportunity column. Well, there is a lack of autonomy, of independency, and there are also other aspects concerning availability of workers, but also cross-cutting projects. And we also have a high unemployment rate. There are also there is also a lack of career opportunities. So I think that in terms of trade unions and cooperatives and services, but also in terms of SSE, there is still maybe a need for focusing on these workers that need more guarantees, because all the platform workers are not necessarily weak workers. So we have to identify the priority, but also all the matters and issues that must be settled. And they are not all of them are precarious or insecure employees. So it's important for Europe to harmonize all this. Nowadays, we have a lack of regulations. And I would like to say that this is the gist and this is the key message and the takeaway from my speech on this new form of work. I tried to answer all the questions that were asked by you. Thank you.
Grâce aux questions.
Thank you very much, and thank to all the public for the questions that are already coming. So I'm going to go back to give the floor to Esteban, because you were saying that the solidarity economy is not an option, actually, but a way to regulate all the different social problems, actually, and also a way to transform society and to transform economy and to radically change the paradigm. Would you like to add something else about that?
Yes. Okay. Are you hearing me now? I think so. Great. Do you want me to speak just to that one question, or?
It was a way to introduce you, but feel free to expose what you wanted to say.
Great, that's helpful. I just wanted to have a sense of how much time. Yeah, I think, one of the quotes that has been circulating a lot, I think all over the world, but certainly in North America and throughout the Americas, is one from actually from India, where we've been thinking about how the pandemic itself is a portal, and that all of the disruption of this crisis is an opportunity to step into a new world. And I think what that new world is up for contestation. It's up for shaping, and I think that's helpful, because for many years we've been having conversations about the future of work, where it seems like we're presupposing a lot and ceding a lot of territory and saying, okay, it's coming, it's out of our control, and what are the things that we can do to cope with it or handle it, or maybe carve out just a little niche for something that reflects our values around taking care of one another, and a space for SSE. And yeah, I think what I was saying to kind of intervene in that is that actually, and it's a conversation we've been having in the US, that actually the opportunity is not only to ensure that our own preservation for social solidarity economy, nor to simply try to expand and grow it a little bit, but actually we have to play to win the whole thing. That we are dealing with certainly centuries of racial capitalism, a climate crisis that has everything to do with the economy as it has been designed, and a set of incentives that have been built around extraction, profit maximization, dispossession of wealth and resources, and so you know, this is the end game of all of those value systems. It gets us colonialism. It gets us settler colonialism. It gets us slavery, and certainly it gets us rampant environmental degradation that gets compounded the larger our economy gets. So this is it's actually not just about, hey, there's maybe a slightly gentler or more sustainable way of doing things. This is the moment where we insist upon the way we rebuild our global economy is by using these models and reprogramming the incentives to make these models, these values, these systems, the way that we balance stakeholders and participants and voice and democracy and accountability and really ownership, that all of that needs to be the way that we rebuild, because this is it. This is the end game. I mean, the world is literally on fire. So we really don't have another option. So it's not merely a matter of being in touch with a phenomenon of wealth inequality, of declining trends of social security and protection, or the ability for families to thrive. All of those things and more are going to continue unless we seize this opportunity. And one of the ways that we've been talking about this, you know, we're just coming off of our national conference, which we typically only do every other year, and we just had it last week. And the theme of that conference was the work of the future. We sort of flipped the idea of the future of work, not only to sort of be clever, but really, I think that inversion of thinking about the work of the future forces us to see both aspects of what this entails, which is, of course, envisioning what work will look like in the future, and what the places of cooperatives and social solidarity economy in that future, and understanding where the future is headed, which is not only around an economy based on social services, but based on care. We're going to have a global, an aging global population concentrated in East Asia, Europe, and in North America. And so those are all things that we need to anticipate. Like, what are the future jobs of elderly care, healthcare workers, and not just based on health, but all the other logistics and things involved in supporting elderly people around their regular errands and even just their social needs of human interaction and relationships, right? So it's certainly thinking about that. It's certainly thinking about the ways in which the future work will be extremely more digitized beyond what we're currently capable of imagining. But also the work of the future forces us to contend with our own agency, that we have to delve into the work of actually shaping the future and bringing about our preferred future. So our conference really started exploring those themes last week, and I'm sort of reorienting to some of the wisdom that my colleagues, some of our keynote speakers brought to that space in thinking about how, in order to do so, given that SSE is fairly small in some ways right now, certainly in terms of the sort of mainstream consensus of what what viable economic models look like, that that we need to be in much closer alliances with institutions, social movements, and even political power, and contest for that power. And I think that there's a new opening now. That's part of what that idea that this pandemic is a portal that we can step through into a new world. That interstitial space that we're in right now is one where there's a wide sympathetic audience of our neighbors, or even people in power, bureaucrats inside of government and other nonprofit institutions, that are willing to think about things differently. They're hearing from those who are supposed to be in charge or supposed to be in leadership that they don't have any other ideas. They don't have any other way of doing this. That their best guess for how we get out of this is more austerity and cuts and tax breaks toward the largest corporations, with hopes that some of that will trickle down into some sort of wealth or prosperity for us. I mean, their best solution is maybe if we enact some form of a universal basic income, that consumers will continue to have the purchasing power they need in order to keep the economy as it currently exists functioning. So I think we are leaving behind the idea that we're bystanders toward the future of work, and instead insisting on making sure that all of the friction and all the hurdles that we face in growing and expanding the social solidarity economy are removed, and that in fact the reprogramming of our new economy is one where we're the ones who have frictionless ease. I mean, right now, you know how easy and quick it was for the Silicon Valley corporations, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Google, etc., to expand their market share, expand their reach, get these lucrative contracts with, you know, school districts in the age of socially distanced education, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's so easy for cities and governments to turn, local governments and federal governments, to turn their purchasing power, tax breaks, and different incentives and policies into sweet deals for the large corporations that are currently in power. So what I want to see is a world in which we flex our power, we are able to capitalize and capture the interest and the willingness of everyday people, and even people in power who are seeing the crisis we're in, to be able to imagine different systems. And I think we have amazing stories to tell. We have models that are proven to work. And once we have that level of easy access to capital, easy access to mobilizing workforces, to building solidarity among working people, and ways of taking care of ourselves, then when we start to layer that into facing the digital future around workforces, it becomes a little easier. Some of the symptoms that we're seeing, some of the signals we have of the world that is to come, even before the pandemic, are really looking at and taking seriously the trends around gig work, contingent work, freelance work, especially as the sort of underclass that props up everything about the digital economy, right? That platforms they have this veneer or this presentation as if it's this smooth, seamless technology and algorithms and codes are running everything. But actually all of that stuff is propped up by human labor. It's piecework. Mary Gray talks about this in her research in her, I think, very increasingly important book that came out last year, 2019, called Ghost Work, that really looks at this rising global underclass of people who, every time you do a Google search, there are people involved in validating information, in tagging images to say, this is a dog versus this is some other kind of animal. You know, this is a person walking or this is this particular celebrity, that everything that we do, whether it's undergirding scientific research or the entertainment industry or just social media itself, how you flag content for being appropriate or inappropriate, something that's scary or funny or dangerous, all of that involves human intelligence and people doing this piecework of building the global economy. And so one of the things she's noticing, whether that's the human labor involved in ride-sharing apps or other platform economies, is the importance of setting up systems for workers' empowerment and worker organizing. If this becomes the shop floor of the future, then we need to start thinking about ways of building solidarity, mutual protections, fringe benefits for workers, even looking at guild models. I mean, in the last chapter of the book, she's really talking about the ways in which forming worker cooperatives is one of the few hopes we have for those people who are powering the digital economy to be taken care of. And that's certainly analogous to the work that Sandrino has been involved in with SMART and some of the freelance work in the future of work. So I think we're seeing already really interesting experiments in the US, mostly for the people who've had the longest experience of being marginalized within the mainstream economy. Restaurant workers, domestic workers, people who do home cleaning, home health care, childcare, tutoring, even pet care. A lot of those are the fastest growing industries within the worker co-op movement in the US. And so there's a convergence that's happening with groups like the National Domestic Workers Alliance, the Restaurant Opportunity Center, and some of the worker co-ops that are in similar industries to figure out, what does it look like to set up a third-party portable benefits system where people can get retirement or pensions or healthcare funds and benefits that are seeded by clients and patrons, but that follow the worker as opposed to being tied to the workplace, right? Those are things that they're working on and that we're starting to experiment with. Looking at the resurgence of guild models for collective bargaining and collective benefits within particular industries. So whether you're doing transportation as a food delivery, bike courier, or a taxi driver, or some other industry like in the building trades, as an independent contractor working not on large industrial scale union construction, but really doing home repair, retrofitting, weatherization, which we certainly need more and more of to make homes energy efficient when we think about the green transition to sustainable energy solutions in the 21st century. These are all things that can be organized even as an independent contractor under guild models, where you're really part of a fuller network that can demand a certain type of protections, including protections around harassment-free workplaces, whether that's racialized harassment, Islamophobia, sexism, and sexual harassment, right? That all of those things we can even use the internet itself as an organizing platform to make those kinds of demands. So it's really interesting to see that. I think why don't I just say the last line?
Sorry, because mon ordinateur s'est coupé.
I'm sorry, but I had a problem with my computer. So you can now go on if you want to conclude your presentation.
Sure. Sorry about that. And lastly, I was gonna make a point about innovation, which I think is central to the themes that we're exploring today. It's interesting to me that social solidarity economy, that we're in a position, unfortunately, where we've been too small to fail, that we haven't actually had the bandwidth to be able to experiment with things, that every project needs to be a success. There isn't the bandwidth for iterating and experimenting in order to meet the different kinds of possibilities and challenges that are posed by the 21st century. All of the space for innovation is in venture capital, private firms and enterprises, non-cooperative startups. And so when one of our projects is threatened or tanks, it brings down a whole network of people who funded it or supported it, and it kind of smears the name of the model for anyone who was involved. That's something that needs to shift. We need to have the kind of bandwidth to be able to innovate if we're talking about meeting the challenges of digitalization and the 21st century economy. We need more risk tolerance. We need more support and investments, including the backing of nonprofits, government institutions, research institutions, and we need to, I think, also to be able to externalize some of that innovation and iteration, so that if we're, for example, thinking of building a digital interface or an app that enhances an existing business, we need to be able to firewall the business itself so that the app is allowed to fail, or whatever new experimentation we're sort of retrofitting otherwise is allowed to fail without it threatening the existing successful enterprise itself. Those are some of the things that I think we need to be able to include. And I think lastly, when we think about the world that we're stepping into, it's one where, precisely because of digitization, the validating aspect of having relationships, of having a personal connection, certainly to the extent that we're embedded in communities as SSE groups, is only going to rise in its importance. That with the context of disinformation, of fake news, of everything from catfishing to hacking and digital security, the information that people get from a trusted or local business, one that upholds and is very clear about cooperative values and social solidarity economy values, those things are going to actually, there's a larger market and a larger interest in doing business that way. So I think that needs to be part of how we're innovating, and the opportunity for us to scale in a different way, and not only for us to think about ways of retrofitting existing SSE around digital platforms, but actually retrofitting our values onto existing enterprises that aren't currently involved in the social solidarity economy. So exporting that and inviting a new, wider community of millions, if not billions of people, workers, consumers, patrons, supporters into that climate. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Esteban, and sorry for the digital mistakes I made with my application. Sandrino, je me tourne vers vous.
Sandrino, I would like you to talk about the SMART project, which is very important from a European scale. Actually, there are a lot of different projects that will be proposed at a European level on this topic. So would you like to add something more? Yes, I just would like you to show my PowerPoint presentation, if that is possible. So I just would like to start by saying that the real protection is social, of course, but it must also be universal and general. And we have already talked about it during the previous question, but we also need to make sure that the social protections systems are addressed to all the workers and not only part of them. So workers even within the informal economy. And from this point of view, protection that is based on and guaranteed universal income that would be very important for the future, especially for all the populations that are most in need and difficulty. So I'm going to talk again about the social question, but also the changes in work. And if we can go on with the slide, actually, when talking about the COVID-19, we haven't mentioned the fact that nowadays we are living a moment in which it is essential to go back to the welfare state. So we need some more protection given by the government or by the mafia organizations. And in that case, I talk about some articles written by Roberto Saviano, an Italian journalist that is dedicating his life to the analysis of a specific kind of mafia, which is called Camorra. And actually there were even a film and a TV series based on his experience. And right now Roberto Saviano is telling us something more about the actual situation, especially in Naples, where after the lockdown period, after the end actually of the lockdown period, there was a great return, a great came back and appearance actually of mafia organizations that decided to substitute and replace the government, the Italian government. So today there is a direct relationship between the need of protection, collective protection, and on the other side, the consequences coming from the lack of protection, and so the appearance of organization based on corruption. So nowadays, mafia organizations in Naples actually is investing a lot in small businesses. And right now, Roberto Saviano is telling us about the risk of a greater interaction between those mafia organizations and also the other governments in Europe. I think that the COVID period gave us the possibility to put in place some changes that were present even before, actually. And David Graeber, an anthropologist, died on the 2nd of December 2019, and he was the creator actually of the idea of the non-useful works and jobs actually. And right now, we are wondering about more or less the same topics and the same problems, because nowadays we discuss and we talk about the importance of workers. If we have, for example, top workers and other categories of workers, people is wondering actually if their job, if their work is still useful. There are a lot of concerns actually coming from the labor work. And we have already mentioned the teleworking, which is present in the second line of my presentation, but there are also some other questions concerning the subordination link as a main way to guarantee and establish the relationship between employers and employees. And so workers and employees must give to the companies, to the different companies, all their knowledge and skills, and on the other side, employers must give to employees the total respect, of course, of their needs. And right now we need to rethink about this link, because subordination is still nowadays one of the conditions in order to have access to employees' work and jobs in general. But we needed to assure more protection towards workers in general. And there are also some other people suffering from a negative, depressive situation during the lockdown. And I have to say that those personal experiences are now influencing their professional life. And a lot of people are now wondering about the place of work in their lives. So if we live to work, or if we work to live. And as we can see, there is a movement that is very important right now, that is growing right now, where people are just trying to understand if they want to leave the city, to leave their comfortable paid job in order to take on the risk for a new adventure, a personal adventure. And sometimes they also wanted to leave the city, for example, in order to develop their activities in other places.
So SMART is an organization that was set up in Brussels 20 years ago, and which is now in 9 different countries, in Belgium, in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Austria, in Germany, in Sweden, in Hungary, and in Holland. So the interest of SMART is quite known in some countries, such as in France, because it is based on an equivalent movement, a movement that is quite similar to the working cooperatives. It's a simple model, so freelancers can work there, and they can gather, they can be together and work for the same company. So when they are co-owner, there is a cooperative model, and through this kind of collective gathering, of this kind of collectivization of the work, they can become employees because they work for the same company. So this is a solution that has been developed for more than 20 years, and it is very important, more and more important in some countries. And sometimes we have 100,000 people working around SMART. They have developed their activity after the setting up of this organization. We have more than 40,000 people using SMART nowadays, in 40 cities in 9 European countries. And we can say that despite the crisis and the situation, there are always new people subscribing to SMART, and these people want to carry out an independent activity, but at the same time they don't want to sacrifice and to renounce their access to corporate production. What I can say on that is that this is a group of freelancers that are quite creative a lot, and they are interested in innovative solutions during the crisis, since there are a lot of members of SMART that developed very smart strategies in order to pursue and carry out their activities in the education world and universe, and they have been very, very responsive and fast in order to keep on carrying out their activities and just suggest their companies to keep on working with new solutions, remote solutions, etc. So this smart solution is a very interesting one, and this was a kind of test for the workers that was carried out in 2017, 2018, and nowadays we still have some difficulties. We know that smart is to a certain extent between two different worlds. So we have two binaries, we have two independent worlds in terms of work, and the freelancer is no longer as it was before, and it's not always connected to the idea of a person who can can be completely independent in terms of protection. So this is an old vision of freelancers. It was like 40 years ago, and when the world was more rural, for example. And first of all, it is made up of workers that need social protection, and they want to get this kind of independence. And at the same time, we also have this idea of employees. So this is something that is getting more and more important, but there are also difficulties to open up to new solutions. And I can ensure, I know that, for example, for trade unions, their reference is this kind of need for CFTT trade union in France, and this is a reference for them, and this is a reference for employees. So it's a good thing to say that the trade union world is opening up to a new vision of work, which is not just subordinate work, but at the same time, the employees' world is very rigid nowadays. For example, in France, they are questioning the status of 4,000 members of SMART that have no indemnities for unemployment because this association that is in charge of these benefits and is managed on the same level, and this is the entity that grants these benefits. So they criticize that there is SMART through which we allow people to work as freelancers, but they also benefit from some benefits of employees. So we have this new format, the cooperative format, and they question SMART and they criticize SMART, and they do it in a very, very violent way. So, for example, they were asked to stop working for SMART in order not to lose their unemployment benefits. So this is just to say that in the future we will have to work for that, for SEE, because there are some risks that must be taken into account, and there are also some efforts that are made in the trade union world. I would like to move on to the next slide. So the new framework and the new forms of employment, so it's much easier to support them and to direct them in a way when we already have some social protection mechanisms. So we want to make it more universal, and to a certain extent we wanted to take into account some healthcare needs and understanding difficulties, and also the need to embrace these new needs and open up to new needs. Second challenge, speeding up the process for a social Europe, that is to say, our partner Franca on the role of Europe. We know that there are a lot of difficulties, but the employment world has become more and more flexible and mobile. So we see that there is a need to work on a European level, and we want Europe to accept new universal forms of work and employment. And 3 years ago, there was the start of a process for social rights, and it is progressing at the moment. But if you take a look at the current situation, I think that we should really speed up this European movement for social rights. And then, just to close my speech, I would like to reiterate the need within the framework of Europe for a promotion of right to for social experimentation. We see it at SMART, that was, or other associations that were set up with difficulties in other countries, so difficulties to acknowledge or to make people acknowledge the character of social innovation. And the leaders, the people in charge of these associations, they take very important risks. So we can't ignore them, and we should work, we should think out of the box and leave this framework. When we talk about this, it's something disrupting, and sometimes we are completely wild when it comes to innovations. But in the world of social innovation and SEE, we need a minimum framework that authorizes us to carry out tests and carry out projects, tests, in order to develop this at a larger scale. So nowadays there is a lack of acknowledgement at the European level for the European continent. So we have not too much knowledge of social experimentation, because we always need a framework, and it's not always the case. Thank you very much, Sandrine. Thank you for your speech. You talked about the new organizations, new forms of organization, new forms of work, etc. Pauline, would you like to talk about the new form of enterprise, of business that is coming up in Africa and that concerns 10 African countries, I think?
Allô, je ne sais pas si vous m'entendez.
I don't know if you are hearing me or not.
Oui, j'interpellais Pauline pour qu'elle puisse.
Well, I asked Pauline to take the floor to talk about a new form of company that is coming up in 18 African countries, not 10, but 18. I think there is a connection issue for Pauline. If it got lost, we can start answering the questions that were asked. Okay?
Jacques, est-ce que on peut prendre les questions?
Maybe we can take the questions and start answering the questions. Jacques?
Jacques, peut-être rafraîchir ta page parce qu'on ne t'entend plus.
Jacques, maybe you should refresh your page because we can't hear you. But anyway, a lot of people have asked some questions in the chat room during the presentation, and we can start from these questions and leave the floor to someone who would like to talk or to take the floor. Well, you just have to raise your hand, sorry, and we will be able to open your microphone and to switch on your microphone.
Yes, hi. My name is Sven Hart.
I am Mr. Hunt.
European policy on global career management for top athletes, and I also work in. I'm also active in the European Institute of Innovation and Technology of the European Commission, and more specifically in the Transport and Mobility Innovation Hub. And what surprises me is that, for example, in all these platforms like Uber, who are those platforms in transport, for example, that have become alive for a couple of years here in every country by now in Europe, and who position themselves as very sympathetic and green economy platforms, inviting you to fill up your car with some goods or your delivery van and take along some of the goods. But in fact, they completely undermine the moving business and the transport sector. And the first thing, and that's my question actually, so I've been researching this, and actually all these platforms, they use the same technology, the same software, platform software that is developed by five software companies in India. It only costs like 12,000 euros to implement that software, plus let's say one full-time developer to fine-tune such a platform according to your wishes. So it's not such big of an investment, and I'm wondering how.
Sven, pardonnez-moi, je vous interromps. I have to interrupt because Pauline is getting back on the platform, so we will give her the floor and take your question afterwards.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you very much. Pauline, c'est à toi.
Pauline, over to you.
Alors, est-ce que je vois pas mes slides du tout.
I can't see my slides at all.
Vous m'entendez?
Yes, are you hearing me?
Oui.
Yes, Pauline, we are seeing you and we are trying to show your PowerPoint. We took some questions and now it should work properly as far as I see. You can start.
Oui, en fait,
yes. I talked about the pandemic that changed everything during the few months that we spent struggling against this small virus. Well, we realized that all the countries have gone through the same problems more or less, and we had to rethink our working habits. I wanted more specifically talk about what happened in Africa within the framework of the fight against this pandemic. I wanted to start by saying that we have a framework that allows to work on the cooperative We have the Act OADA on cooperatives. It's a national law. WADA is the organization for the harmonization of business rights in Africa, 18 countries in total, and this is something that concerns 18 countries, African countries, but up to now, what we could have considered as a revolution was considered not in a very good way. I mean, we talked about the big companies, and the economy realized that we went back to our basics. I heard Stefan talking about work as it should have been. And that is to say, we get back to work with certain specific values. And with this WADA law, we have the opportunity to see and to look at cooperation in Africa as a company, as such. Cooperatives used to be connected with laws that concerned associations, etc. So we carried out the structure of SSE in this way, and this is to say that in many African countries there was a lack of SSE regulation, so it's a kind of walking board for us. And as far as we saw, this is a new form of cooperation. During the last few months, people from Cameroon supported this process, and those from Togo that were a little bit more advanced in a cooperative perspective, they started to work together within the framework of OADA. And they have changed a lot within the framework of the human and social solidarity economy, and they also asked people to work together thanks to digitalization as well, thanks to our new technologies that are a little bit missing nowadays. They could change a lot with the reference to progresses. So they have set up a cooperative house, and Cameroon was ready to start structuring a cooperative in this way. And during COVID, the community had the opportunity to be strong enough, and also struggled against pandemic. We addressed above all the stakeholders, governments, but also big companies, SICAM, etc., but also other big companies. And they were also paid for that, so they got a benefit. And this is something that made it lose a part of its revenue. And this is what we uh, we we decided to criticize it, and we wanted to be full members of this association. And we were right, because they have produced masks much more than a SICAM, which is our international um, company. So today, are you hearing me? Can you hear me? Hello? Yes, we can hear you. You can speak, Pauline. Well, the eco world was addressed, and manufacturing production is more competitive on the market rather than in big companies which were nevertheless financed or funded. So nowadays we have another look on the setting up of enterprises. So everyone can address a more human cooperative, and sometimes the revenues come from men and wives, and this is part of the wealth that stays in the territory, in the area. So we hope that they can be made, they make their voice heard, and the pre-COVID must take into account all these forms of company that were managed during COVID. And this is quite important to rethink the employment world, because it allows people that were completely marginalized in the market labor, that women are in the cooperatives, and they were part of the company of the cooperative, but they were part of the informal sector. When we and when they started their activity, they started a differentiation of their services, and we are working with the social security entity and in Africa, and the cooperative is based on all the sectors and is based on the WADA law, and we think that it is important to give a good structure to these cooperatives and to support them in order to make and to set up really competitive facilities that can also stick to the values that are basic values. So communities could see the capacity of acting of this world that was quite difficult with less skepticism. And we think that this is a kind of a way to advocate decision makers. They were condescending and compliant, and we want it to be something good, something broader, that can be done as broadly as possible. So that technology is a little bit an issue today, so I don't want to duel on that, but I hope that through the questions I will be able to better and further develop all these aspects. All the aspects that I have mentioned a little bit quickly. This is what I wanted to say concerning this pre-COVID projection. So it is important to develop all the companies because there are companies that are weaker, and we want to give everyone the same opportunity. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pauline. It's 5 o'clock. It's almost 5 o'clock. Well, we had some technical issues and it's difficult to take some questions now because we are already running late. There were some questions about universal revenue. Maybe we can talk about that once again, because it's a question that is very often asked everywhere in Europe, and in Europe, all over the world, in the US. I'm a little bit frustrated because we also talked about digital economy. So US takes into account the digital economy to develop itself and to suggest alternatives as well. Esteban also talked a little bit about that.
À ce forum,
And then there were also other participants in this forum who said that the cooperatives were more resilient during this crisis than they were before. And then also the free software, how it can contribute to development. So how can we contribute to the development of this? So there are a lot of things, a lot of food for thought. I hope we will have the opportunity to keep on talking about that in the next few weeks and days during international Mont Blanc meetings. I wanted to thank our four speakers who were with us today, and everyone has told us something about a specific number of problems, and they shared a lot of food for thought. I think that we also raised a lot of different topics, for example, weakness of precarious work, but also this hope and this struggle and everything that has been very well described by people. So all these topics that were raised, and Esteban also talked about the convergence of struggles or fights in the US. So people were struggling together. So I suggest we can leave now. And Annelise, maybe you would like to add something before we leave. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Jacques. I would also like to repeat what you have said, all the questions that were asked during the speeches of today will be dealt with during the next meeting, in which we will be talking about all these topics. Thank you very much, Jacques Bestois. There were some difficult technicalities, technical problems. Well, next week we will meet again. There will be a third session about SEE and Millennium Development Goals, SDGs. And on the 10th of October there will be also another on the 1st of October there will be a closing session, a concluding session. The program is on the website. Thank you very much once again. A huge thank you to all of you. Thank you. Bye.